Okay, we're getting this going here. And what I'm showing a couple of slides to start with. Tina and I were just talking about how we learn this stuff, and it seems so relevant to current events. So I don't know if you guys have been following the big protest in Delhi by the farmers. They've been there for a year with their tractors and blocking Delhi and just causing holy hell. And I've seen pictures of them, but I didn't appreciate they were Sikhs. And it makes so much sense from what we've talked about. We know the Punjab is a very fertile valley, right? It's right next to the Indus, one of the original river cultures. And we've gone through the whole Sikh story. It started with the interaction with the Pashtuns, but we followed them all the way through to their tragic end in 1984 in India. But they're still there, and they dare to be active politically, and they won their year-long struggle. And Modi withdrew the laws that he had Parliament pass. So that's the Sikhs in the news. And then the Ladakh, they made this week's Economist, just to look at how climate change is affecting the nomads at high levels. And this valley is no longer green because of the change in the weather. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time talking about the Sikhs, and what we learned is today the Punjab is the location of two hotspots. We're very close to them, between a Hindu nation and an Islamic nation, and they've both got nuclear weapons, and not much in common now, and a lot of animosity, and especially with a nationalist government now in India, threatening to take away the citizenship of the 200 million Islams. They're becoming second Islamic Muslims in India are becoming second citizens as we speak. So we learned about that, and we learned about the story of Kashmir. I'm just going to briefly review the Punjab and why these are sites of possible future conflict. And the stakes now for a political miscalculation are so high in the nuclear age. So this is the Punjabi butterfly that we've talked about in the past. Half of it has gone to Pakistan, and half of it decided to go with India. And this is the way the Punjab looked to the British. This is the British map of the Punjab. And then in 1941, they did a census, and this was roughly where the majority of religious people were. The green was the Muslim, and the non-Muslim in the pink and the yellow. And we've learned that 48% of those are Sikhs still, even after the diaspora. And you've got the Amritsar's sticking out like a sore thumb right there on the border. And this was the dream of a Khalistan, an autonomous Sikh region. The Sikhs overplayed their hand, and it ended in the tragedy of 1984 when the Sikhs bodyguards assassinated the Pashtuns got out of control and they assassinated Indira Gandhi. And the worry now is, will Pashtuns get out of control again? North of the Punjab is Kashmir, and we learned about that because the Sikhs invaded, and the Brits piled on after that. And we learned then with a partition that this purple part, the Maharaja there decided finally to go with India after hemming and hawing, but realized that he couldn't control the western part of Kashmir. And so this is de facto ruled by Pakistan, but all the purple has gone to India, but there's disputes all along this border. Kashmir used to be autonomous, but Modi has taken that away, and they're ruled directly from Delhi now. And so you've got a lot of tension along this border, particularly the part of Kashmir that is so heavily Muslim that it has to be governed by Pakistan. And so the dotted line is that line of control. It's not an official boundary at all. It's just a truce, a ceasefire line, and things could go very wrong very, very quickly. And Modi has ramped up the tension. The historical realm of Kashmir is the dark red. The current international boundaries are the black lines. And we remember Ladakh because our friends recently went there, and Irene had an interest in Ladakh.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
You said that the black lines were the current borders, the borders that the English established. Where does it go from there? Because I don't see black after that.
Well, this is the accepted border, right?
Okay.
This is the traditional border of Kashmir, the red, and the accepted ceasefire border is this dotted line, the line of control, and it's not black, and that's the reason for concern. The ideal thing would be to negotiate a solid black line like you have with Afghanistan, but they ain't talking, and things could spiral out of control. And this, and this is really close to Islamabad. They're not far from all this possible turmoil. So now let's return to the Pashtuns. I just wanted to review the context of what we've covered with the Sikhs and why we took time out with the Sikhs, because of the relevance to today. And the Pashtuns are a little bit like the Sikhs. They're caught in the middle in many different ways. But let's go back to 1818. We remember the Durrani Empire has been going since the mid 1700s, but the tribal tension, the Pashtuns are not united. They're split into clans. They have quarrels. And in that sense, they're a little bit like the Kurds. Unfortunately, the Kurds have never been able to get together and have a solid nation. So now they're broken up into not just 2, but 4 different countries. The Pashtuns are now broken up into 2 countries. And high tension, we've gotten drawn into that and just recently broke off. That's what we're going to be talking about more. And the problem now is that those 4 tribal fiefdoms cross the boundaries between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And these boundaries are disputed. Afghanistan and Pakistan do not agree on where the boundary is. Afghanistan has rejected the Durand line, and we're going to learn what the Durand line is, which is going to take us into the British era. Just to review, Pashtunistan has always been a dream, a united Pashtun nation since the days of Roshani. It was conceived and when they were defeated by the Mughals. But this dream has been ruined by the Brits and the Punjabis. And we're going to talk about that and how that dream was ruined in more detail. Because it affects the internal politics of both Afghanistan and Pakistan. So take a look at Pakistan and the ethnic divisions. Here you see the Pashtuns, and now they make up 18% of the population of Pakistan. The majority live down more in the fertile plains, so it's denser down in the Indus River Valley, and then those 5 rivers that merge, and so there's more dense population, but you've got 18%, and it's grown, and we're going to talk about how the Pashtun population has grown and what that has meant. But just to review, sorry for the cutoff here. This is Peshawar. This is the furthest east that the Pashtuns set up and controlled territory. And they controlled it for long enough that the Durrani could have their summer palace there. But the Sikhs took it away from them in 1823, and that was it. The Pashtuns have never officially governed Peshawar, but it's a Pashtun city, particularly now. It's more a Pashtun city than it was in 1823, and I'll tell you why. The British took it away from the Sikhs in 1845. The successor to the Durrani dynasty was Dost. I'll just use his one name. Dost started off as a tribal warlord and made himself the governor of Kabul, and gradually expanded, and he became emir of all of Afghanistan. The difference between an emir and a king, the emir just doesn't have quite as much control as a king. We'll leave it at that. There's more complicated definitions. But he had become the established emir within 8 years. The first among equals, maybe would be a good way to describe what an emir is. And he thought he'd go and try to take the Peshawar back, but it was half-hearted, and he was a little bit afraid. He held back because he knew that the British were looming, and he wasn't sure that he could hold it. And so 1837 was the last time the Pashtuns even tried to recapture Peshawar. Just for context, Peshawar's here. This is where the battle was, and this is Khyber Pass. I know I've shown these before, but for me, it's just useful to review and keep things in mind of what's going on. So in the 1820s, the Pashtun areas around Peshawar, they're restless. The Sikhs have come in and pushed out the Pashtuns, and there is protest movement, but it's not organized by Pashtuns. It's organized by Mughal hangers-on, Indian Muslims who resent the rise of the Sikh empire. And so they come in to the Pashtun area, and they organize the Pashtuns to fight against the Sikhs. And they're inspired by the teachings of Shah Waliullah. And we talked about him before. We talked about him. He was a contemporary of Wahab. And he had gotten advice from the Saudi fundamentalists on how he could strengthen the Mughal Empire against the invasion by the Hindus, the Marathas. So now the Marathas have been defeated, and now the Mughals and their hangers-on have to look at the Sikh threat to the north. So they move up and try to radicalize the Pashtuns as allies against the Sikhs. This is the first of the many times that Pashtuns have rejected fundamentalism, and it's relevant for today. So the first time here you're dealing with the fundamentalists, the Mughal fundamentalists, and they can only get so far with the Pashtuns. The Pashtuns have their own social structure, and they ain't going to change it for anybody. The Pashtun Wali is going to be stronger than any kind of Wahhabist concept, religious fundamentalism. And the attempt to transfer leadership from the Pashtun clan tribal chieftains to clerics, to Wahhabist clerics, backfires grandly, as you can imagine it would. Well, guess what? Today, the Taliban are facing the same kind of resistance from Pashtun Wali. Now, the challenge today is the Taliban are themselves Pashtun. This is new. Always before, the fundamentalists were Mughal Muslims, but now they're homegrown, and so that's the interesting battle now. But we've seen already that the Taliban have executed ISIS members who are extreme Wahhabist fundamentalists. But they have accepted aid from the Saudi princes who are not as extreme as ISIS. So how this plays out is going to be very interesting. But we know that there's a tension and a fight now between fundamentalists for power in Afghanistan. So back to the emirate and what the emirates controlled. Dost controlled this amount of territory, Persia on the west, the Brits creeping up, ever creeping up. They take power away from the Sikhs in the 1830s. And then the Dost feels strong enough. In 1837, he says, well, I'm from the Broxi tribe, and we're going to establish a dynasty, and we're no longer just an emir. We're no longer first among equals. We're first. And so he established the Broxi dynasty in 1837. And we'll go through some of these details a little bit later, but this dynasty lasts until 1973, when a republic is declared. So we're getting into stuff that we can remember now. The Broxi dynasty is going to last till 1973. And I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail. but let's first look at Dost and his family and the beginning of the Barakci dynasty. I showed this briefly, I think, at the end of last week. This is Dost himself. He's got a son, Sher Ali, who's going to succeed him. Sher Ali has a son who just very briefly holds power. We're not even going to put his name up because the real power is going to go to his cousin, Dost's other grandson, a nephew of Sher Ali, the Iron Amir, Abdur al-Rahman Khan. And he's going to be a big name. He's going to last to 1901. And that's going to see us through the first of the two wars that the Pashtuns have with the Brits. Again, this is the end of the dynasty. I'm showing the Muhammad Zahir Shah. He was the one that was deposed in 1973 by a reformer cousin who declared a republic. And that they yielded to the communists in 1977, which is a long story. But I wanted to give you the end, and I wanted to tell you where we're going. We've taken a very long journey with the Pashtuns, but the end is in sight.
Excuse me, that Mohammed Shah, can you point him out in two pictures before? The picture before this?
No, he's not there.
Oh, he's not there?
No. He doesn't take power to 1933. And that picture that we were looking at back there was probably 1850, 1860.
Thank you.
So Dost and his three Emir successors, his son, briefly his grandson, but the nephew, which is another of his grandsons, they presided and defended against British encroachment 3 times. So this is the great game, and they the start of the great game starts with the British invasion, and that takes place in 1839. So Dost has only declared himself as really a king for 2 years, and in come the British. Now, the war doesn't start immediately then. The British kind of come in friendly, but one thing leads to another, and by God, they're occupying Kabul. And finally, the Pashtuns say no deal, and they revolt against the British garrison that has subtly infiltrated, just like they did in Kashmir, but it didn't work like it did in Kashmir. They're not as the Pashtuns are not as pliant as the Kashmiris, and so war breaks out. And the army of the Indus, which is what the British call their army, are totally wiped out. Maybe legend has it that there was one survivor, a doctor, who got away, and is depicted here in a famous painting approaching Jalalabad, retreating from Kabul. But total British defeat. In addition to that defeat, there were other periods of resistance that didn't exactly amount to war. The Indian Wahhabists were still at it in 1863, even though they couldn't convince the Pashtuns to buy in. They were still there, working with the Pashtuns, and they killed 900 British troops at Ambela Pass, but the Pashtun still rejected the Wahhabist literalist interpretations.
Who do you mean by Indian Wahhabists?
So they are Indian Muslims from the Mughal tradition.
Okay, so
who are very much resenting the encroachment of the British on the Mughal dynasty. And so this is the beginning of a pattern of reaction against Europeans in particular.
So were the Mughals always Wahhabists?
No, they weren't. They were splintered into many different groups, but there were clerics who had their own belief on the way to resist the Brits. And the way to resist the Brits was to become more fundamentalist. And they were a faction. And they were the faction that was most likely to leave India and go and help other people, the Pashtuns, just like ISIS is in Afghanistan trying to help, right? But their basic religious philosophy is incompatible, particularly with the folk ways of the Pashtuns, Pashtunwali, which has a very strong secular social system. And that's the interesting thing, and why I wanted to take a close look at the Pashtuns, because there is this clash between global fundamentalism, which is what Wahhabis is. They want the whole world to convert, versus secular local Pashtunwali.
So was it Aurangzeb that got them more Wahhabist? Because I know at the beginning of the Mughal Empire, it was more liberal and Sufi-like rather than
right. The Wahhabis, you'll remember, came in 1750. Why? Because of the advance of the Marathas from the south. Okay. So it was in 1750 in response to revived Hinduism, right? The Hindus had been very compliant, or that's not the right word, but had no power to resist and or make a huge impact until the Marathas.
So 1750?
Huh?
1750?
Around 1750.
Okay.
Okay. So now that was the now we go to the Second Anglo Afghan War, and this gets us to 1878. And in 1878, Amir Sher Ali is on the throne. Dost is dead. He's on the throne. His kid is probably in his 20s. And the Russians start creeping down from the north, just like the British feared. This is why the British got into the Great Game. They were very worried about the Russians, and it wasn't just their imagination. Mir Sher Ali welcomed the Russians. Come on in. What you got for us? And the Brits were very paranoid. And this is where I'm going to make the correction. Aiko pointed out that I mentioned him before out of context. This is the correct context for James Abbott. He was one of the British operatives in the Punjab who was given the task of resisting the Russians as they were coming south. And it was, remember, the Russians came south to the Uzbek Turkic area of Khiva. And why? Because they were taking white slaves from southern Russia. And James Abbott was worried, okay, maybe the Russians want more than that. And so he was sent as a spy just to keep track of what the Russians are doing. And in his early days, in order to win favor, he arranged for a rescue of hostages from the Khiva area. So this is the proper context. And you'll remember where Osama bin Laden was captured? Abbottabad, named after James Abbott, because he went native and was very much respected. You can tell that he has gone native. And you'll remember when we were doing and finishing the story of Kashmir, there was this character, someone that came down in a family that had at first cooperated with the British against the Sikh, and now he was in a position of power, but he was double dealing with the Russians, and in fact entered into a plot to murder his brother and the British resident. So it wasn't just the British paranoia. The Russians really were there causing mischief. We mentioned him when we were talking about Kashmir and going through to the end with the story of Kashmir. So this time, after the ignominious defeat the first time, the British send in the Highlanders and the Gurkhas, and they storm Kandahar and go on and conquer Kabul. They take the Khyber Pass and take control of the whole eastern part of Pashtunistan, and that's what's going to be causing the problem. They come in and they depose the emir, and they deal briefly with his son, right? I showed the little kid who's in his 20s, but they didn't find him strong enough. But they managed to say and got an Afghan agreement that we're taking over your foreign policy, we'll protect you from any external enemies, and we're going to give you an annual subsidy, spend it as you will. So the Brits won the second war. They absolutely won it and came in and took over for 40 years. And they had the help of the Sikhs, who fought the Pashtun resistance and took over Khyber Pass and have Pashtun prisoners at Khyber Pass. Now, this is the nephew. This is the guy at the end of the family photo. And he becomes the Iron Emir. Why? Because he crushes his fellow Pashtuns who are trying to dissent. He had been in exile in Tajik territory, and the British brought him back. And Abdul Rahman Khan reigned with a strong fist for 21 years. And he presided over the redrawing of boundaries. So you've heard about the Durand Line. And here is Durand himself, a member of the, a Brit, a member of the British Indian Civil Service. And he got the emir to agree on spheres of influence with the Russians. They drew borders. And these borders split Pashtunistan, as we've seen on the maps of current maps of Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Pashtunistan is split. And the eastern part of the Pashtuns, there are many tribes, but I'm going to just mention two. The Swats, which are in the northeast part on the Pakistan side, and the Wazirs, which are in the southeast part. And they very much resented being cut off from their fellow Pashtuns to the west. I'm just going to point out the similarities between Durand and Durrani. There's no connection. There's no connection. And so the Brits and the Russians come to a settlement, and they agree to draw all kinds of borders, Durand Line only being one of them. But it's the most consequential for the Pashtuns because it gives 5 Pashtun tribes, the Swats and the Wazirs, plus 3 others, to direct British rule. Now, they're later going to become semi-autonomous as part of Pakistan, the Northwest Frontier Province. Semi-autonomous just recognizes that they're hard to govern. They're mad. They don't want to be part of British rule. They won't want to be part of Pakistan rule. So they're described as being semi-autonomous. And this is where the Northwest Frontier provinces are now in Pakistan. And remember, this area, where if you throw in all the Pashtuns, is 18% of the population, because this is a mountainous area. It's hard to get a lot of people in here. But there's this gap here, and I'm going to explain this funny gap to the left of the Northwest Frontier Province. By the way, the hippie trail, when back in the 60s and 70s, went through Afghanistan. We were planning on going on it at one point, and it went right through this land, and there were stories about hippies who wandered off the trail and had bad experiences. So that gap, I'm gonna flash forward and just kind of finish the story of that part of Pashtunistan and the evolution of place names, because it's so confusing. So why was there that gap to the left, to the west of the Northwest Frontier provinces? Well, that area together, they have absorbed 3 million Pashtun refugees since 1979. So it's even more Pashtun than it was before. And so the number of surviving Hindi or Gandhari ethnic group remnants have been totally swamped by Pashtun refugees. And so much to the point that on social media today, there's a new push for Pashtunistan because of this changing population. So the Pakistan government in 2010 thought that maybe it would be a good PR move to finally change the Northwest Frontier Province to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And what does that mean? It means the land of the Pashtuns. So here you have the Pakistani government recognizing facts on the ground. This is the land of the Pashtuns. We're renaming the Northwest frontier provinces, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And Khyber, adding Khyber to it, is land of the Pashtuns, but Pakhtunkhwa, without Khyber in front of it, is being used increasingly to describe Pashtun culture and society. And the gap to the left has been called the federally administrated tribal areas, FATA, as if things weren't complicated enough. But we've got another abbreviation to deal with. And why is this different than the 5 Pashtun provinces? I think all along it was acknowledged that this group of people higher up the mountain, if you will, right on the border with Afghanistan, were always going to be impossible to govern. We'll give it a try with these 5 tribes in the Northwest frontier province. We'll give it a try, but these people up there, they're ungovernable. So we're going to call them Fatah. And the British idea was, let's just do a deal with the local warlords up there. That's the best we can do, and buy them off. We'll have an agent up there, a political agent that'll just keep an eye on things. And when action needs to be taken, we'll swoop in without the cover of any kind of legal idea, and swoop in and take care of whoever's causing trouble up there and leave. And so it was ruled by what is known as the Black Law, which basically is no law, except for the discretion of the British political agent up there. Then I told you about in the Northwest frontier province, the Wazir people. They were the most upset about what was the Durand Line and what happened. And so when it was obvious that the Brits were going to have to leave, and there was talk about a separation of India into Hindu and Muslim. They started saying, you know what, we don't want to be in either of those countries. And they started pushing again really hard in 1935 for Pashtunistan again. And they weren't going to go along with partition. You know, if you're going to divide India at the same time, just cut us out entirely. And they resisted, but they've lost repeatedly. And Waziristan, as disorganized as it is and ungovernable as it is, it's a place where you can create secret bases like the CIA did in the first, when the Mujahideen resisted the Russians, the Soviets, as part of our Cold War policy. We went in and put resources into Waziristan, just like we bolstered Osama bin Laden during that period. And so if Waziristan's unstable now, we're part of the problem. And then it became a haven, because it's ungovernable, for any warlords or rebels that came in. So the Taliban and now ISIS. Finally, Fatah itself was included in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So now these 2 funny named geographical areas are both part of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in Pakistan. And it's one of 4 provinces in Pakistan. I think Baluchistan has even less people. So it's the 3rd most populous area in Pakistan after the Punjab and Sindh. Okay, so formerly the green was the former Northwest province, and now it's Pakhtunkhwa, and the purple was Fatah, and now it's also Pakhtunkhwa. So things are simpler now, and maybe for the people who advocate Pashtunistan, they got something, right? The land of the Pashtuns. They didn't have that kind of designation before. So maybe that's a concession that they feel that they can build on. So back to 1897, we're still living in the aftermath of the second Afghani-Brit war, which the Brits won, and they took over control of the foreign policy and of the governments. They were going to hold it for 40 years. And right in the middle of that 40 years, there's a revolt. And it's another revolt in both Swat and Waziristan, in the Northwest frontier province, as it was known then. So it's a major rebellion, and it's significant because it's pure Pashtun. Aiko, this is the first rebellion that's not being led by Muslim Wahhabis from Mughal India up causing a mischief, trying to get Pashtuns to work with them to throw the Brits out. And it's led by the Mad Mullah, and it's been often described because of him as a religious rebellion. But really, it was a rebellion against the Durand line that cut off the eastern Pashtuns that wanted to be part of a larger Pashtunistan. Here's an actual picture of the Mad Mullah, one presumes. I'm not sure about that. The great game sputters to an end. It ends in 1907. The great game is over. The British and the Russians sit down. They've both got bigger problems. One of the problems the Russians have at this point are the Japanese. The Japanese have defeated them handily a couple of years before in the Russo-Japanese War. And how did the Japanese win so quickly and handily? With a sneak attack on a harbor off near Korea. Sound familiar? And it destroyed all the Russian Navy that it was in the area. And the Russians couldn't even get ships to that area for months and months because they had to leave and go all the way around and replenish. They didn't have any ships on their east coast. They all had to come out of the Baltic. And so that's what the Russians had in mind. So they're in no position to cause any mischief. They've already had the first smaller rebellion of 1906 that was a warm-up for 1917. So they want a deal, and Britain is getting increasingly worried about rising Germany, and they've got problems in Europe. So they agreed to have a spheres of influence, and the only lines I want you to pay any attention to on this map are these blue lines that define spheres of influence. So to the right of this blue line is British sphere of influence. And Russia's sphere of influence includes Iran. That's what they cared about at this point. They'd given up on Afghanistan, and they ceded to the British the Hindu Kush in Afghanistan as their territory. After all, the British had won that war in 1878, and the Russians accepted reality. Great game is over. Then in 1919, Amir Habibullah issues a fatwa against the Brits. He's the current king in the line of the Barakzai. I'm not going to talk much about the emirs and the kings after the Iron Emir, because it doesn't matter. But I just, my frustration, I'm trying to keep things as simple as I can for you. And Habibullah is a very common name, and it's attached to so many characters. I just wanted to show you this as an illustration. I'm trying to keep things simple. So he issues this fatwa in 1919, and this is amounts to the third Anglo Afghan war. And Afghanistan doesn't have an army. How can Afghanistan win a war, any kind of war? Well, it's fought by irregular Pashtuns from tribes. Each tribe maintains a militia. And you put together all these militias into the irregular Pashtuns from both sides of the Durand line. They don't give a darn anymore about the Durand line. They come together, it's totally ignored. It's just abstraction on maps. And the Brits are obviously reeling from World War I. They're in no position to fight. And the Afghans, the Pashtuns, take back control of their foreign affairs. Okay, these irregular troops come into action again. There's another Habibullah who is a Tajik, and he's a guerrilla leader, and he comes in and he overthrows the current emir, our king, with the support of conservative clergy who thought that the Barakzai were becoming too modern. This was the second time we've seen Pashtuns turn to Tajik allies. Remember, they were fighting when they were the capital was in Kandahar, and one faction decided to ally itself with the Tajiks, and the payoff was to move the capital to Kabul. So we have another example of the conservative clergy finding it expedient to work with a Tajik guerrilla and overthrow the Barakzai. It was very brief because the king's cousin called on the irregulars. Now, the irregulars are being called on so often that they've kind of become regularized into a concept called the Lashkar, or the Loya Paktia, which is a combination of many different tribal militias. And this is where the Loya Paktia is from. This part of Afghanistan, it's a little bit like our army leans heavily on Southerners. Well, their army leans heavily on this part of Afghanistan, and this is where there's a lot of fighting and a lot of problems, and hard to establish any kind of order. So I think this is going to be a good place for me to stop and take questions. The throne is restored, and it winds up. I'll just go quickly by this guy, and it's his son who becomes Zahir. All right, so I've made that connection, but I'll fill in the details. I just wanted to show you we're very, very close to the end of the story of the Pashtuns. We're going to have to talk a little bit about what happened to the Russians and what happened to the Americans, obviously. But the main players and power sources in the Pashtuns, I think, have been laid out. So I'll stop sharing at this point and take questions.
The thing is, you said that Russia was distracted by the Japanese in 1907, but actually the Japanese on one end and their own people on the other end, because the beginning of the Russian Revolution was definitely probably even more troubling than the Japanese to the Russians.
I agree.
Yay.
Point for Aiko. So I have a question. When you say like the borders are, the borders have shifted or they've agreed that this is the new borderline, like, is that an international agreement? Like, who decides where these borders are? I know, like,
it's just
sat down and drew them on, kind of like Trump in his pen, but.
Yeah, no, the great game is not an official game, right? They're not playing by anybody's rules. So it's just the two of them trying to gain influence over territory. And I think they both reach a point of exhaustion. If you look at and Aiko's read both books on the great game, you look at all the resources that they threw at it, and they each had reached a point of exhaustion, and maybe realizing that it was better just to have a truce and pay attention to other events than to keep going with this game.
Well, and the other thing is the British were famous for drawing lines wherever they governed. It was in Palestine, in Rwanda. They just drew lines.
Syria.
Yeah. So
Iraq.
But then does the international community pay any attention to them? I mean, who's like, the people must not who live there. They're just.
No,
yeah, but the British were so powerful at that time, they could sort of do whatever the way they wanted.
Yeah, no, there was no League of Nations. That would be another 20 or 30 years forward. When there was a League of Nations, the King Zaire, he joined it. So Afghanistan was part of the League of Nations, but the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, even with an international community, is still disputed. The Afghanis say the Durand line that the Iron Emir signed off on was accepted under duress. That's what their argument. This was an imposed border, and we don't accept it. And that's why Pakistan is so nervous about Afghanistan and doesn't want them to be a successful nation. Just that border. But the other thing is they don't want India over there being welcomed because that would mean they'd have to fight a two-front war. one interesting fact is the Pashtuns do have a link to India. Hamid Karzai went to college in India. You can go to college and get a good education in English in India. So there is a Pashtun Indian connection, which makes Pakistan, the Punjabis, the Sinds very nervous.
And then, John, when you talk about the Pashtuns, aren't there lots of different Pashtun tribes? So, like, did the different tribes recognize anybody as being sort of creating a coalition of Pashtun tribes, or is it still very kind of, individual?
Yeah, well, that's the problem. And I think at one point there was so much disorder that the Pashtuns threw up their hands and they said, we're not doing very well with this. Let's give the young students a chance. The young students, the Pashtun name for student is Talib. And so out of desperation, let's give the Talibs a chance to see if they can organize this. They have some weird ideas about fundamentalism, but and there are Islamic ideas about women are maybe more lenient than ours, but let's give the Talibs a chance. And it turns out that the Talibs get in power and their attitude towards women is maybe more Pashtun than a Muslim. It's complicated, and I showed you my sketch of the clusters of all the influences at work on Pashtunistan. I'll want to review that again, but this is just to answer your question. There's just so many variables.
Mm-hmm. And the maps and those charts are really, really helpful because I get really confused at who's on base and
yeah. Well, that's why I thought it would be useful to understand Afghanistan, to start with the Pashtuns, and I'm learning a lot as we go.
This is great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Have a nice week.
Okay.
Relax.
You guys Wednesday, right?